for the first time in forever, the Spooktober edition. Now, last week we took a gander at one of the most iconic sci-fi horror films ever made, and that was John Carpenter's The Thing. And if you haven't watched that video, you can check it out by clicking the link in the description below. But this week we turn our attention away from outer space and to here on Earth in Santa Carla, full of some blood-sucking types, as we look at an 80s cult classic. This is The Lost Boys. Wait a second. I am going to be talking about spoilers for this film, so consider this your warning now. Now, admittedly, I was a little cautious going into this. I mean, I was aware of its cult status. People love this film, especially some of my closest mates absolutely adore this film. But some of the footage that I had seen from the trailers and clips, it hadn't really done a lot to win me over. And you also have Joel Schumacher directing the film, who he passed away sadly earlier this year. And I'm sure he does have some great films under his belt, but the one that he's most infamously known for is Batman and Robin, arguably one of the worst films of all time. And he'd also done Flatliners, which I just really was not a fan of, so yeah, my expectations weren't that high. I was actually speaking to a mate of mine who loves this film, and he said, "Luke, just to give you a heads up, it's a very 80s movie." And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? Oh. The Lost Boys takes place in Santa Carla, nicknamed the murder capital of the world, as the city is plagued with constant missing people cases. Cue Michael, Sam and Mum Lucy, who move into the area only for Michael to bump into Kiefer Sutherland and his cronies, soon discovering that they are vampires, only to later find out that he is on his way to becoming one too. Now, the style of The Lost Boys, I think, kind of plays into both good and bad. Firstly, I mean, it helps give the film its own unique identity, its own sense of originality. I can't say that I've necessarily seen a film like this before. I mean, it's incredibly fun, easy breezy. It's almost like a spiritual sequel to The Goonies, except that The Goonies aren't trying to locate buried treasure, they're facing off against vampires. And the overall presentation, well, it helps give the film quite a cool, retro aesthetic, the rapid style of editing, the constant pumping soundtrack, and for the most part, well, still holds up. Even the overall presentation of the vampires fits the mold for this movie. You've got punk rock bikers dressed head to toe in leather, each of them wearing that one singular earring that immediately increases their cool factor. They're basically everything that the vampires in Twilight wanted to be, but, I mean, in that series, they just ended up being pale, moody, and lame. On the downside, though, there are a couple of elements that feel ever so slightly dated. Some of the supporting performances are stilted. And, yeah, look, it's very cheesy. Another minor criticism that I had was, it feels like there are two tones battling it out for dominance, butting heads until one ends up taking supremacy, and that's what we get for the second half of the film. Now, on one hand, you've got Michael discovering the ring of vampires, struggling to come to terms with that he is eventually, or he's slowly turning into one. You've got romance with Star and his eventual confrontation with David. And that basically plays out like a horror type scenario. And then on the other hand, you've got Sam, who is wanting to save his brother and clean the city full of vampires, and he teams up with wannabe vampire hunters Edgar and Alan Frog, played by Corey Feldman and Jameson Newlander. And that angle ends up taking more of a comedic approach. Eventually, though, the comedic approach seems to win out, and thank God it did, because I much preferred this film when its tongue was firmly planted in its cheek, rather than playing it semi-seriously with Michael, who I thought was a bit of a flat character, discovering the vampire inner circle. As I said, most of the performances were pretty good. Jason Patric is fine as Michael. Corey Haim I thought was really good as Sam. He does a lot of the comedic legwork, and he ends up having a really great rapport with Corey Feldman in particular, who is just so funny in this film. I mean, you can clearly tell that his character is putting on a voice, and part of that was actually due to Joel Schumacher telling Corey Feldman to do his best Sylvester Stallone / John Rambo impression, and it really works. Like, Edgar and Alan Frog are probably like the best characters in the film, because they're just, it's really silly. They're kids who are convinced that they are ready and ready to take on vampires, and it kind of works in their favor, but it flips expectations of typical vampire stories, plays out in some like California surfer dude type lingo. It's funny. It's really funny. One part that didn't quite make sense to me though was in the scene where Michael is kind of discovering his powers and goes to Star for answers. Bear this in mind. He is on his way to becoming a vampire, arguably possibly one of the most harrowing things a person could go through. And he puts that to one side for sex. If it were me, my first instinct would be to get those answers rather than have a slow motion 80s sex scene montage with Cheaton Mac playing over the top. Also, everyone that I've spoken to about that moment, their response is always the same. It's just, it was the 80s. Kiefer Sutherland was really good as David. He has this quite intimidating screen presence that he's not necessarily a scary character, but he's definitely someone you don't want to mess around with. He's a vampire. Of course you wouldn't want to mess around with him. He'll turn you into a lifeless creature. The others of his group, though, I didn't think that many of them were all that good. Especially because they're just generic, loud 80s wacky lackeys. And wait a second. Is that Bill S. Preston? Wild Stallions! And so by the time we reach the finale and the better tone has finally taken over, we get a brilliant Home Alone / House of Horrors type sequence as the vampires attack and our group of heroes defend themselves with makeshift stakes, holy water pistols, and a surplus of other booby traps.
That's what I said, Sam said booby traps!
The screenwriters throw in a really nice twist that actually took me by surprise, as Max is revealed to be the lead vampire rather than David. And on the whole, The Lost Boys was an incredibly fun, ridiculously entertaining film, albeit one that I wouldn't necessarily think of as an all-time horror classic. How could I forget the score and soundtrack? Just when you thought it couldn't get any more 80s, Thomas Newman scores a ridiculously catchy synth score. You've also got some amazing punk rock anthems that will get you dousing yourself in baby oil, speeding along a beach on your motorcycle, and gyrating like crazy while playing the saxophone. Sail up to the night, lost in the shadows. Overall, I had a lot of fun with The Lost Boys, and so after watching it for the first time in forever, I can safely say that it is worth it. Anyway guys, those are my thoughts on that film. Let me know, have you seen The Lost Boys and what did you think of it? And as I'm sure some of you are aware, we are currently on the road to 300 subscribers, so if you are watching this video, you have enjoyed yourself, but you are not yet subscribed, what are you doing? Please click that subscribe button down below. I promise you won't regret it. And Spooktober continues next week, and here is a little teaser for what you can expect. Thanks for watching. If you have enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more, please make sure that you click that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. All the links to my social media accounts, my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and my letterbox are all in the description below. And if you haven't liked the video, what are you still doing here?